think we're all about ready to start here, anxious to start the event. Buenas noches. I hope this finds you all safe and well. My name is Josiah Luis Alderete, and I'd like to very warmly welcome you all to City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that continues in the footsteps of City Lights Bookstore's in-store calendar during this crazy pandemico shelter in place that we're all experiencing. Though unfortunately we're unable to hold events at the store like it's been such a tradition of having these events at the store. It's been real difficult not having them, but through this series, we're continuing to celebrate the works of authors that we know and love and admire with online readings, discussions, and forums throughout the month of August and into the fall. We're very happy over here at City Lights to finally give out the good news that we've reopened our doors to the public. Following SF Health Department guidelines, we aim to make this reopening as safe as possible for everyone. So por favorcito, please come by and visit us. I don't mean this lightly, we missed you all. We really did. The bookstore missed you all, the books missed you all. So come on back. You'll be able to once again browse our stacks. Our business hours are 7 days a week from noon to 8 p.m. Like I said, we're real excited about reopening. So hope to see you all soon. And as many of you know, City Lights is a publishing house as well as a bookstore. Throughout this whole pandemico, we've continued to publish books in the grand tradition of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Pocket Poet series. Recently, we are really proud to have Sophie Adali's new book, as well as Nigerian poet Uki Niduka's new book. We put out Hilary Moore and James Tracy's No Fascist USA, The Green New Deal and Beyond as well. And man, my personal favorite from last year, the one and only Bob Kaufman. So learn more about the books that we're publishing. Please check them out on our website at www.citylights.com. You can also keep up with City Lights at social media, at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For those of you who have friends out there that have missed today's broadcast, it's going to be rebroadcast on YouTube at a later time. So if you know anyone that misses it, just let them know. And tonight we are thrilled beyond words to be hosting Joshua Bennett in conversation with Tongo Eisen Martin, Jesmyn McCarthy, and all the way from the East Coast, Simone White. We'll be exploring Joshua Bennett's new book, Being Property Once Myself, Blackness and the End of Man, published by Belknap Press, Harvard University Press. During this reading, I'd like you all to know that copies of this book will be available for sale tonight via the link we're going to be posting in the chat section of your screen. And por favorcito, please do purchase a copy if you can. It's a great way of supporting City Lights and its mission of bringing you and continuing to bring you awesome books. So I swear I'm almost done talking. I just have to give you special words about our speakers tonight. The main man of the evening tonight, launching his book Zoom tour. We're really excited to have Joshua Bennett tonight, the author of The Sobbing School as well. He's the winner of the National Poetry Series and a finalist for the NAACP Image Award. Joshua has received grants and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Ford Foundation, and MIT, and he was a junior fellow in the Harvard Society of Fellows. He's the Mellon Assistant Professor of English and Creative Writing at Dartmouth College, and he's going to be joined tonight by Tongo Eisen Martin, beloved Bay Area son. Tongo is the author of Heaven Is All Goodbye. It's published by City Lights Books in 2017, and also of Someone's Dead Already, Bootstrap Press 2015. Tongo's poetry has appeared in Harper's Magazine, New York Times Magazine, and Heaven Is All Goodbyes was shortlisted for the Griffin International Poetry Prize and was awarded the California Book Award for Poetry, an American Book Award, and a Penn Oakland Book Award. Tongo is also a movement worker and educator whose work in Rikers Island was featured in the New York Times. He's been a faculty member at the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University, and his curriculum on extrajudicial killing of Black people, We Charge Genocide Again, has been used as an educational and organizing tool throughout this country. He is from San Francisco. Also joining Joshua Bennett is going to be Jesmyn McCarthy, who is an assistant professor jointly appointed in the Department of English and the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. His research is concerned with the intersection between politics and aesthetics in African-American literature, post-war or post-45 literary history and Black studies. While attending Princeton University, he founded a digital humanities project based on the Sylvia Beach archives held at Princeton's Firestone Library called Mapping Expatriate Paris. Wow. His writing on culture, politics, and literature has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, The Nation, Dissent, The New Republic, and N+1. He also serves as an editor at The Point. Also joining us tonight will be Simone White, who's the author of Dear Angel of Death, of Being Dispersed, and House Envy of All the World, and of the poetry chapbooks On Rest and With Kim Thomas Dolly. Simone's writing has appeared in publications including Art Forum, Bomb, Eflex Journal, the Chicago Review, and the New York Times Book Review. She teaches at the University of Pennsylvania, and we're really grateful for her taking out time for her busy schedule to join us. You all, I just needed to give you an example of these amazing authors welcoming and joining us tonight. So please, y'all, give them a warm hand, do that clap hand thing, and welcome everyone to City Lights Live. So without further ado, I'm going to give it over to these people and let you be wowed by this amazing event. Welcome, y'all. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you, Josiah. That was a beautiful introduction. And thank you, everyone that's joining us today, including our illustrious readers, Tongo, Jesse, and Simone. If nothing else, I wanted the launch of the book not even to just be about the object itself, but really just an occasion to celebrate all the beautiful work that's happening in the field of Black literary studies, Black poetry. And I got that motto from Yosef Surratt, who's one of my mentors. He's currently at Columbia University. And I remember when his book Spirit in the Dark launched, what he had was a panel of just artists come together, read some of their favorite passages and read just whatever work was on their heart. And that really inspired me, living as we are in a moment marked, not just by catastrophe, but I think a reminder that we have to rely upon one another. So with that being said, I'm just gonna read a brief passage that was taken from a recent interview I did with Roro Toko about the book. It's also about my family, which are the condition of possibility for everything that I do. They helped me believe that I could be a writer from the time I was very young. And so it wouldn't make any good sense for me to launch this book without them. One more thing on that, my grandparents met in a strawberry field in Lillington, North Carolina. And so the image on the front of this book is an homage to them and the love they imagined in the midst of great duress. Being Property Once Myself is a book about how we love each other. It is a book about the astonishing breadth of the each other at the end of that last sentence, and thus the depth of our adoration. It asserts that our dead are always with us. In that sense and others, it is also a book for my grandmother, Charlotte, who passed at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and her mother before her. The same woman who prayed for her grandchildren's children in a South Bronx tenement, speaking words over the life of a boy she would never meet in the flesh. I live and breathe in the wake of her words flung to heaven. When I sit down to write, I aspire toward the power of her conviction and her meditative tenacity. The professional path that led to this book was being raised by Black people that loved Black people, and who taught me from a young age to believe that our stories were worth telling, our tradition worth studying, our people worth language lovely enough to approach, if only at a distance, the transcendent joy that is made possible when we are gathered together. I was trained as an undergraduate student in an Africana Studies program at the University of Pennsylvania. As an 18-year-old, I understood that program, now a department, as first and foremost a haven for Black students trying to make it through the institution with varying levels of success. This, of course, was a pivotal moment in my development as a writer and thinker. The habits of study we learned were inextricable from a commitment to taking care of the most vulnerable among us. We were taught the missions and methods of Black studies so that we might better understand the truth of the modern world and how we might improve it, no matter our professional trajectories or individual dreams. My time as a graduate student at Princeton and at the Society of Fellows at Harvard after that only concretized my sense that the power of Black studies was in its capacity to enhance our social and political imaginations in this way. I learned who I was in the order of things, and my sense of what was possible only grew from there. Through the generous mentorship of Saidiya Hartman, Gregory Pardlow, Imani Perry, Yosef Surratt, and others, I came to understand myself as someone who did not have to relinquish my sensibilities as a poet to become a literary scholar, but could instead embrace the language, the liveness of Black poetry to enhance my approach to the lifelong work of literary theory. My hope for this book is that it lives a long life, and that it is ultimately considered a meaningful contribution to the growing constellation of texts examining both the history and present workings of Black critical theory concerned with non-human life worlds. I also hope, and I've said this elsewhere, that the book's engagement with the work of Black poets is a reminder that poetry plays an absolutely central role within both Black letters and Black social life. Here I'm thinking, of course, of Jupiter Hammond and Phyllis Wheatley as some of our earliest literary ancestors in terms of the written page. But I'm also thinking about the role, as Hortense Spiller so beautifully details in her stunning 1974 dissertation, Fabrics of History, Essays on the Black Sermon, of Black preaching as the first form of Black poetry in the US context. The tone and texture of this book, and all my writing really, was influenced in the first instance by Black preachers. Given those conditions of emergence, I hope, whatever its merits are, that my book shines a light on the aesthetic brilliance of Black writing, Black performance, and Black poetics as they operate outside the borders of the US American Academy. Finally, I hope that this book contributes to a renewed interest in the writings of every author whose work I have explored within its pages. The discovery of this particular thread in their work has changed my life in so many distinct ways. My intellectual, aesthetic, political, and spiritual sensibilities have never been the same. And so it is one of my dreams for the book that it likewise inspires others to think about the work of environmental reparation and the work of Black freedom struggle as fundamentally intertwined. Our work, I believe, comes with a singular responsibility. It was Carter G. Woodson who once wrote that there would, quote, be no lynching if it did not start in the schoolroom. Our collective project, then, is not only the repudiation of lies about the role of our people in history, but the forwarding of new images, new language, a more robust and truthful engagement with the indomitable beauty of the Black expressive tradition and all that it has given us. With that, I'd love to get the panel started. Thank you all for listening. Shout out to Yonkers, New York. I feel like I need to say that at the beginning of everything I do for the rest of my life. So shout out to D-Block and to DMX and Jada in particular. Thank you. I think next up, Tongo, are you gonna be first up? People are gonna read in the list of introduction, yeah? Okay, Tongo.
Fast cash smuggled through my infant torso, I arrived smiling. Call check cash and spot seal my eyes, hearing voices, but none of them sing to me. I'm lucky to be a metaphor for no one. Washing my face with the memory of water, my back to the edge of a chessboard. I'm settling into a petty arrest record with my face laid flat on my apartment kitchen table. Mississippi linoleum begins. Citizen Council, Rest Haven, government plants braiding together breathing tubes. A Greek philosopher takes the path of least resistance. The Bronze Corporation age dines. Cultural white nationalism in boardrooms, they ask if county line skin can be churned directly into cornflakes. A Senate special chain gang mines our neighborhood for evidence of continent unity, makes a mess of the word kin. Makes a war report out of a family secret chord progression, a tenor part before dying, makes white people geniuses. Lynch mob freaks rehearse their show tunes in the courthouse walls they take for mirrors. Rehearse for a president's pat on the head, a pat on the head they take for audience laughter. Doesn't matter if you name a building Du Bois 1,000 times, a lot of sirs in the soup, a lot of speed. Treaty ink stained teeth write themselves a grin. Imperial speechwriter grins boil over in my ink riddled mind. A non-future dripping with real people. Real people, not poem people. A street with no servant somehow, a soul singer somehow in the West. Constellation eternity or the poor man's fish order. Is half of a spirit or husk of a messiah. Religious memorabilia made from the wood of a prison farm fence. System makes a psychic adjustment. For sibling domestic colonies and not-for-profit Tuesday meltdowns, we do straightforward time. Dehydration takes hold of the police state. Every 28 hours, the house dares the slave. What turns you into a sergeant mention turns you into a landslide of sirens. Layout sketches pass between deacons, plot twists provided by white beggars in a black city, the fathers who Reagan flicked. Kicking garbage, thinking about race of production, notebooks dangling out of car windows, we go the way of now extinct hand gestures. Mediterranean sandals and underground moves in tandem. I mean, whoever I am today is still your friend. Crooked cops and crooked news junkies, Amadou Diallo is your mind on military science. Mario Woods, the gang enhancement they even put on God. If you turn down the television low enough, you can hear San Francisco begging for more war profiteering. We will not live forever, but someone out here wants us to as mice. Pouring through an hourglass in Olympus, Babylon, or Babylon, Olympus, a subway car smoke session making its way into an interrogation room. Maybe it's all just one room. It's definitely all just one smoker. Live from your monotheistic toy collection, poor people writing letters near books about Malcolm X, ice picking the art, new floorboards for Watt's prophecy, pen twitching over scrap paper, pen tweaking, while smoothly a bus driver delivers incarcerated children. The Lord's door opens. All street life to a certain extent starts fear. Sometimes with a spiritual memory even. Pre-dawn soul clap, your father dying even. Maybe I pushed the city too far. My sensitivities to landfill districting and minstrel whistles, modal gangsterism, white supremacist graffiti on westbound rail guards all overcome and reauthored. Revolutionary violence that chose its own protagonist, a muted stage of genius, the garbage is growing voices. Condensed Marxism, warrior depressors, underpasses in pockets, we might be deities, a decent bid on the Panther name, a merciful Marxism. This quiet home life, a metaphor for relaxing next to a person who is relaxing next to a gun. I stared at my father for a few seconds, then returned to my upbringing. Returned to the souls of Ohio black folks. Revolution damn near pagan at this point. You know what the clown wants? The recipient wants to interpret pain only. Wants a pen cap full of bullets. Real advice from Malcolm. Wants your old soul to turn young. See ancestors in broad daylight. The Atlantic licking South Carolina like a penny-plated gun named Underground God. Conversational drinking gourd wants to pull a 38 out of a begging bowl. Wants me to hurt my hand on his pen. I'm not tired of these rooms. Just tired of the world that gives them a relativity. My only change of clothes prosecuted. The government has finally learned how to write poems. Shootouts that briefly align, that make up a parable. White bodies are paid well. Do white men actually even have leaders? All white people are white men. All I do is practice for it. A rat pictures a river, can almost taste the racial divide, can almost roll a family member's head into a city hall legislative chamber, knows who in this good book will fly. I've decided not to talk out of anger ever again, Lord. Me and my wife at the same time, I met new audience members for our pain. We passed each other cigarettes and watched cops win, a city gone uniquely linear, Harlem of the West through a true universe. I will always remember you in fancy clothes, my wife said. So here I sit, twisting in silk ideation. My rifle made of post-bellum tar, targets made of an honest language. The San Francisco poetry is how God knows that it's me whining, riding among the lesser respected wolves. Lesser observed militarization, Dixie-less prison bookkeeping. I mean, the California great coats are coming. Bench mob gossip and bourgeois debt collection. I mean, it's tempting to change professions mid-poem. In the Chicago briefing, a white sergeant saying blank slate for all of us after this black organizer is dead. Standard academics toasting $2 wine at the tank parade. They of nothing, Lord. Nuclear cobblestones, gun line athleticism, and the last of the inherited asthma. Children giving white dolls to play with in fear. Facial expressions borrowed from rich people's shoestrings. I can hear hate and teach hate and call tools by people names and name people dead to themselves. No one getting naturalized except federal agents soon. Carving the equator in the throat soon. I'm sorry to make you relive all of this, Lord. Pre-dime monarchy, friends putting up politician posters and snorting the remainder of the pace. Minstrel scripts shoveled into the walls by their elders. My children sharpening quarters on the city's edge. For these audiences, I project myself into a ghost-like state. For these gangsters, I do the same. Every now and then we take a nervous look east. Sleep becomes Christ. Sleep starts growing a racial identity. Do you ever spiral, Lord? Has the gang age betrayed us? Be patient with my poems, Lord. So much pain, there's a point to crime. I mean, it has to be if race traders come with it. Lord, is that my revolver in your hand? Better presidents than these have yawned at cages, have called us holy slaves. Fill the school libraries with cop documentaries. Baby, I don't have money for food. I don't have a present moment at all. Thank you.
It's fire.
In conclusion, you know, I just want to say that, you know, this is an amazing, amazing book that really actually from start to finish kept me in a kind of a state of fury, in that engaging ideas in which, you know, I'm viscerally all of these things. I'm viscerally all of these people and all of these creatures. And so it was a really it's a really energized engagement of ideas. And I so appreciate what you did and really in what you continue to do. And yeah, man, we're all proud of you, man.
Thank you, brother.
That's all I got to say about that.
Very good. Jesse, you're up.
Well, look, man, it's a hard act to follow. Tongo, man. Look, I thought what I would really try and do is just say a few things. I can't possibly sum up everything that's in this incredible book. But for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet and are curious, I thought I'd just try and say a little bit about how it seems to work and why I think it's so important. And I hope we'll talk about it because, you know, one of the things I really think that's very exciting is I think this is really cutting edge work. I mean, I see this book very much also in conversation with someone like Zakiya Jackson's book, Becoming Human. I think you guys are really at the kind of cutting edge of Black studies today, where we see a lot of work that's been happening, let's say in the last maybe 10 years in Black studies. A lot of stuff that people have been talking about in terms of what's sometimes referred to as the theoretical turn in Black studies, the ontological turn in Black studies, but also these new emerging fields, animal studies, for example, which has been exploding in the last, say, really the last 10 years as well. And also, I think this book is also implicitly, actually, no, it's also explicitly, right, engaged in or at the intersection of eco-criticism, eco-poetics. So it's really tying all of these things together, where Black studies, animal studies, and rethinking the environment, the ecology, being, all of these things at the same time together. And there's really, I mean, I think I really think we're in an extraordinary moment in terms of thought. I think that, you know, obviously in a lot of ways, historically, we're in a moment of tremendous crisis. And I like to think, though, that out of this moment of crisis, hopefully something new and something better is coming. But it can only come if we can learn to think differently, to think otherwise, and to reconceive of our relationships with each other, our relationships to the natural world. This book, in a sense, takes a kind of a notion that makes it very appropriate for us to be thinking about and in the presence of the poets, right? Because in a lot of ways, it's a book about metaphor. And you actually, in your introduction, as an epigraph, quote, or you have a quote from Richard Wright from The Blueprint for Negro Writing. And it's a very famous quote, but I'll read it, where Richard Wright says, "The Negro is America's metaphor." It's a very powerful quote that I think has, you know, circulated in Black thought and in Black studies for a long time. But one of the things that I find so fascinating about this book is that I kind of see your book as a kind of response to that quote that kind of flips it, right? And says, well, I don't necessarily want to ask the question of, you know, the Negro being a metaphor for America, but what is the Negro's metaphor for their American experience, for their American condition, for their American sojourn, right, in this place. And one of the things that you do is you say, well, let me look to our literature. Let me look to our fiction. Let me look to our autobiographies. Let me look to the poetry. And one of the things you find there is that one of the richest sources of metaphor that Black folk kind of engage with centers on the animal. And initially, I think, and folks who don't know you, we can say this, Joshua and I go back to grad school, we know each other. And so I feel really privileged because I feel like I've kind of followed the evolution of this project, and it's been so exciting to watch, and now to actually see it as a book out in the world is so exciting. But I remember thinking initially, how does that work? How does that question come together? And so often I think it's been thought of in a very one-dimensional way. And the question has felt very fraught. Just real quickly, what I mean by that is that I think mostly people have thought about the question of animals or animality and Blackness as one of this fraught proximity, where people say, we were treated as animals, we were considered chattel, and so we don't even want to think about it. We don't want to think about those intersections and those relationships because there's a feeling that even to invoke them might somehow be perilous, might somehow invite a kind of recirculation of a metaphor that we don't like, right? But I think that one of the things that you so beautifully show us is that there are all these really extraordinary ways in which our writers have been thinking with the animal as a metaphor in ways that are far more complex than that. And ways that actually, it's not to say that there aren't still problems of, negativity and all the things that I think stereotypically at a kind of surface level, people have always been drawn to when thinking about that comparison or that relationship. But that there's a whole lot more there to excavate. And you begin the book in your introduction, it's fantastic. I should just say that the table of contents, have you ever seen, I've never seen another book I think that does this, but the table of contents of the book is actually just a list of animals, right? So the horse, the rat, the cock, the mule, the dog, and the shark. And you kind of weave through these readings that connect these animals to texts, some that we are very, very familiar with, that are already well-established canonical texts, like Frederick Douglass's narrative, and others, and this is something, and I'll just talk about at the end as a little example, that at least to me were relatively, and I think it's fair to say are relatively lesser known, and which I think you allow us to kind of revisit or discover in many cases for the first time. And so the introduction to the book begins by considering the very opening of Douglass's narrative, which is a very famous opening passage, but you focus on what I think it's fair to say is a kind of detail that is often not really thought about or kind of lingered on, which is that on the very first page, on the opening words that Douglass gives to us, he relates, he's speaking of knowledge, epistemology, knowledge of his age, and he says, I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs. And you kind of freeze frame for us on that sentence and kind of draw that out and point out how interesting that detail is. And this, I have to say, is something that, I think this is one of the reasons this book is destined to be, in its own way, a classic, because it really made me think about other classics like Saidiya Hartman's Scenes of Subjection, and the ways in which I feel like now, whenever I go back to the narrative, I can't possibly read the Aunt Hester scene the same way. You know, it's sort of, for those who are not familiar, Saidiya Hartman gives a really very profound and in some ways disturbing kind of an unsettling reading of that very famous scene in the narrative, and you can't come to the text in the same way again. And I feel in the same way with this, that even though this was a text that is so canonical and so well known, I just can't read Douglas the same way anymore. You know, every single time I come, you know, I open this book, and I know that I know that many of us will many times again, I'm going to come to that passage on the horse, and it hits different. You think about it completely differently. And so you've opened up a whole way of thinking that has been, you know, was lying sort of in plain sight, but that we hadn't really connected with. And in the chapter on the rat, in which you do this, I think it's fair to say, kind of tour de force reading of, again, this a very famous opening in Black literature, which is the opening of Richard Wright's novel Native Son, with a scene where Bigger Thomas is wrestling with a rat. And you show, as you move through your chapter, that this is a scene that scholars and literary critics, a lot of ink has been poured over this scene. And you kind of move through these different readings, showing how, in a lot of ways, they kind of miss, in some sense, fairly obvious things that, if we just expand our conceptions just a little bit, seem fairly obvious. For example, oftentimes those readings have tended to kind of sort of draw a kind of equation, a kind of simple equal sign in between Bigger and the rat. They're both trapped. They're both, therefore, animals. They're both kind of condemned in this rat maze of their condition. But I think one of the things that you show so beautifully is that that if you look closely at the text, it's actually quite clear that there's actually something of a kind of recognition that's happening in between the animal and Bigger, and that there's an admiration, I would say an admiration that's evident even at the level of Richard Wright's attitude towards this relationship, which valorizes, I think, something like a certain kind of cunning, right? A certain kind of intelligence and realism about the conditions that one is in, such that you could almost talk about a certain kind of admiration, maybe a perverse admiration, but nonetheless a kind of admiration that Bigger has for the rat, for its persistence, its dogged insistence on living no matter what its conditions may be. And so these are really, these are readings that completely flip what have been sort of highly ingrained ways that we've approached these texts. And I don't want to drone on too much here, but I wanted to just mention another one which I find really moving. This one, in this case, it's actually a poem. And that's this beautiful reading that you do of a poem that's not that well known by Melvin Tolson. And it's a poem called The Sea Turtle and the Shark. And it's a wonderful poem that I think you quite rightly suggest is kind of playing on the biblical story of Jonah, but completely revising the metaphors in that story. And in this instance, essentially you have a sea turtle which is swallowed by the shark, but it's quite obvious as you kind of unpack it for us that both the sea turtle and the shark stand, in some sense, arguably for the experience of Black people, Black history, and Black self-making under the conditions of the shark, which stands in a sense for, this predatory state, this predatory capitalism, I would even argue, that swallows the sea turtle whole. These are lines from the poem. From abyss to shoal, sometimes the shark swallows the sea turtle whole. But, and this is, you're reading it, as you know, this is the ending of that poem, the sea turtle gnaws and gnaws his way in a way that appalls his way to freedom, beyond the vomiting dark, beyond the stomach walls of the shark. And this, I mean, you know, the fact that I think this you know, relatively under-examined poem, that you're able to fold this, you know, into not just, you know, a story about Melvin Tolson and his poetry, and maybe not just, you know, a suggestion, though I think it's very much here, that we need to rethink some of the sort of packaged narratives that we've had about Richard Wright. And not just that maybe there's more going on in Frederick Douglass's narrative than we sometimes think there is, but that all of these things kind of tie together, that there's a whole way in which we can think about the way Black people have thought with and through the animal as metaphor continuously, and that there's a whole way of thinking about the literary tradition that's being opened up here, really does this incredible double move that's very expansive, because on the one hand, you're giving us a way of rethinking the literature, right? It's a whole new lens for doing, you know, what you might think of as, you know, a kind of sort of traditional literary criticism. We look at the books and we're trying to think about how to interpret them. But also at the same time, there's this incredibly rich way in which you're making intervention in theory, right? And opening up, as I say, with many other authors and many other folks who are, I think, as I suggested, you know, sort of at the cutting edge, pulling together these different fields and kind of encouraging us to expand the frame at a moment when our, you know, reconceiving our relationship to nature is so essential. I mean, I think we all can feel it, we all know it on some level, but there's a serious question about, well, how do we go about, what are the resources, what are the tools that we have? Where are those tools? And even if we locate them, when we pick them up, what should we do with them? And I feel like this is a book that's helping us to kind of give really concrete examples of how we could go about doing that work. So I think it's an extraordinary book in that regard. And I'll just say really, really quickly, I know I'm taking a lot of time, but one of the things I think that's the sign always of a really exciting book is that you just start seeing it everywhere. And this has just been my experience. You know, every time, you know, I'm reading something completely different, I'm looking at some, you know, a historical document. I was watching a documentary about Mike Tyson. There's this whole passage where they were looking at him taking enormous care of these pigeons that he kept on his rooftop in in Brownsville. And I thought, you know, it's just, you know, your synapses start firing because suddenly you have a framework for thinking about this that, you know, you didn't have before. And just the other day, for completely, you know, different reasons, I was doing some research on some historical questions that I'm interested in, and you know, I was drawn to some papers and some books about the Buffalo Soldiers, right? These Black soldiers that are enlisted in you know, these really terrible campaigns, right? These are campaigns that are essentially about, they're essentially extermination campaigns and kind of the closing down of the West by the US Army. But also the Buffalo Soldiers will get enlisted in the kind of those late 19th century imperial wars in the Philippines, in the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. And you know, it just struck me. The Buffalo Soldiers, like this whole question of the animality there, that, you know, this is just something that I think, you know, I mean, you know, we've all, you know, we know that term, and yet we so often don't necessarily interrogate, well, what does it mean to be talking about these Black soldiers in connection with this animal, and how did they acquire that name? How did they think about that relationship? How have other people understood that? So this book has just been really, I think, exciting, and I hope that a lot of people will read it. I'm certain that a lot of people are reading it. in the field. But I think that even if you're not specifically interested or working in the kind of, in an academic sense in Black studies, I think this is a book you should really pick up and think about, because, as I say, I really believe that we're at a critical moment in terms of rethinking our ecological understanding of the world. And we can tell that it is bound up in the problems of racial hierarchy, in the problems of our attitude towards domination, in our attitude, our affective and emotional lives, in the way we relate to living things, and how we accord them or fail to accord them dignity and respect and recognition. And so I think in that sense, this is a book that has something for everyone. And it's, you know, like I said, a groundbreaking book that's doing, you know, that's really at the cutting edge of the field. And we're lucky to have it.
Thank you, Jesse. Simone, can you close this out?
Sort of. That was a really beautiful testament to your friendship as well as your book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to say thanks to Jesse for that. I want to actually read a little passage from your book. This section, I loved the table of contents, and it really does speak to your poet's sensibility, that you just allow that litany to linger as a possible strategy for organizing thinking. And I really appreciated it. And also I think words are really funny. So, you know, so like those are also funny words. And so I just got a lot of pleasure out of that. But I'm gonna start, so this is the section cock, which of course I am drawn to. And this very beginning of this chapter called Cock, in which you talk about flight and flightlessness, and Toni Morrison's engagement with flight and flightlessness in her work. And more importantly, the thing that I, you know, maybe stupidly didn't get immediately was that this was going to be about masculinity. Like, it just didn't occur to me until I was in the chapter. But then your quotation of Afa Weaver, of weightlessness. So I'm gonna like read a little bit from your thing, and then I'm gonna read a poem, which is kind of a rejoinder to this question of weightlessness, or weight, the weight of masculinity. Anyway, so this is on your page, let's see, I think it's on your page 67. You say, I'm interested in working through and against discourses that imagine little else for Black men beyond the grave, and furthermore in gathering such materials to think toward a theory of the Black masculine that shatters prevailing pathological assumptions about what such lives can bear, here's my cat, or bear forth, and ultimately aims to build something fresh from the shards. And then a little further down, you're talking more specifically about Morrison. And you say, I'm interested in the ways in which Toni Morrison uses animals, and birds in particular, to make a certain argument about how it feels to be a Black man, how she deploys them in order not to critique the limiting, violent ways in which Black masculinity is constructed from the outside, is structured from the outside, but also to describe the means through which Black men and boys bear such weight, how they comport themselves under the duress of everyday life as a perceived threat. And I'm gonna read from this poem, which is called Or on Being the Other Woman, which, you know, thinks about masculinity as a kind of entanglement with forms of violence against women, and also, and love. And I'm just gonna start reading this section of the poem, which comes towards the end. It's a long poem, about 40 pages, and this is just one section. Should I put the cat down? Cat.
On theme. Yeah, it's up to you.
No man has ever not tried to steal from me. That's wrong. The man who never tried to steal from me never wanted to be with me like that. While the man I was with, who explicitly stole from me, was so crazy at the time I didn't think much of it structurally, or I could not think structurally at the time. In California, Prairie Light and Scenes from Midwinter Day were coming to me in a confusing way via social media. I wrote to Laura, I had a dream in which I was overcome or beset by a kind of erotic storm, encircled by lovers. That is, men of whom I would say fucking is eternally in the nature of our bond. The transmutational properties of masculinity, the three, forcefully whipping around me, having become a cosmos of presence to myself, my mimesis with no share of the bearing down. Inside their fucking gyre, I transmitted a signal for help, but it could not escape because the force of the dimensions which they were, or were creating, was a black hole. The real blackness of the hole was true. I woke up knowing what words to say. Say the dream, Laura. Within 2 or 3 days, I had been trying to identify the name of the pressures. No, I cannot remember what any of them had done to me. I try to remember forming an intention. Now I am going to act as crazy as possible and threaten to go to his job and tell his mama and his best friend what kind of person he is and how he's been stealing from me all these years and telling people I'm a spoiled bitch because I have all these degrees and won't take my baby out of private preschool. So I was acting crazy and smoking out the window of my house, screaming into the garden with the morning doves, looking at me like I was crazy. I stopped when he said a number, I guess. I can't remember much about it because I got pretty drunk afterward and woke up in the night thinking, Lord, I am not able to do this much longer. Please let this man see my humanity. In 2 or 3 days, also, I had learned there was no name for the pressures. It was the most ordinary Black womanhood, which is not nameless, has all the names of us, and is nameless, and has no intention, and is strategic. One of the days, a young dancer came up to me and said, I don't know how to embody the musical problems. And I said, well, how does it make you feel? I began to be able to speak of it myself when I felt myself growing more graphically male through its practice. I listened at deafening loudness in my car. Clearly, I am trying to hurt myself. The words they say, they have a newness. I promise never to speak the words in my poems, not in defiance of interpretation, but because they are so creepily hostile and unfunny. The interior they assume in a dress so murderous, I don't see the point of repeating it. This is what words do. How does it make you feel? You are not allowed to have feelings. You are not allowed to have anything. And when you have something, somebody will try to take it from you. Don't doubt it for a second. There is no honor in patriarchy. It is a drug. Sometimes I allow my eyes to roll back in its vicious pleasure. I can feel joy if I remember I am feeling the power of myself as a vacuous thing, an unknown thing, out of which words come under pressure, begin to make new. So that the structure of the poem was falling down around me, as were the constitutive energies of what I was, such as they were visible or detectable to me. I sensed them breaking. They were already broken. This was the condition of which the poem must consist, the radiant materiality of circuitous attacks, some such as might be deflected, others helplessly slip inside what is. And that's it. Maybe we could talk.
Wow. Thank you so much, Simone. And thank you, Jesse and Tongo. Yeah, I would love to talk to you all. Josiah, do we have questions in the Q&A? Can we improvise it? How do you want to proceed?
No one is I know there's plenty of questions out. Oh, I know there's plenty of questions out there from the audience, but no one's posted any yet. So if you all start talking, I'm sure that they'll start flooding in a moment. But man, what an amazing talk, God, and tribute to the book. But please, if y'all wouldn't mind conversating amongst yourself while we all eavesdrop, that would be all right.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, first I want to thank everyone, not just for the rigor, but the intimacy of what was shared here today. You all read such beautiful work across genre. And I think one that shows the intimacy of these forms in our tradition, but it also shows the kind of patience, thoughtfulness, and dare I say it, love that went into your readings of this book. That was a PDF on my computer for many years. And it's terrifying to release a book, and to be able to share it with your friends, I think is one of the great joys in the world. So I wanted to thank you all for that, for the way that you shared this space with me, and with our many friends and colleagues that are gathered here. Simone, I wanted, if at all possible, to talk to you about heartbreak, because I feel like you're picking up on a theme that also travels through the book, and in which I would have never said before that this was a book about heartbreak, but now I think maybe it is. You're making me think about Esh and about Janie and about Milkman, as these characters that are heartbroken. And that part of what I think the figure of the animal does for them is it allows them to think about other forms of kinship and relation that might not necessarily repair that heartbreak, but make it livable. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about what inspired for you the connection between that reading of Morrison, of the chapter on Morrison, and the beautiful poem, the beautiful, painful, powerful poem that you shared.
Heartbreak's a good word. And a word actually I've been thinking a lot theoretically about because of an essay that's really kind of lived with me for a couple of years, which is Alexander Wahale's and Kathy McKittrick's essay on heartbreak, 808s and heartbreak. Which, Jesse, do you cite that essay? I can't remember, but it's been really important to me in formulating this sense that that there's a kind of under-theorized or untheorized refusal to acknowledge our entanglement with certain forms of irredeemable sadness. And that sadness, can't really, there isn't really, and, actually I am really in struggle with the question of metaphor right now in my own work. And one of the reasons I love Tongo's work so much is because I don't feel in struggle with it really. When I'm listening to Tongo, I don't feel constrained by like the notion of metaphorical working or figurative working or like troping. I feel a different kind of freedom in the way he makes connections. But, because binaries, right? One is either happy in love or not happy. Like that actually isn't how love works at all. And, and so I'm very interested in the sustainability of certain kinds of disappointment and how we learn never to expect certain kinds of happiness and maybe the impossibility of ever achieving certain kinds of happiness. And so that words themselves, right, the words that we think of that are supposed to represent our happiness are insufficient for expressing the actual conditions that give us joy. And, I don't know, I could talk about this for a long time, but the long and the short of it is like, this is why to write like literature, right? This is why, because you can experiment with different problems in expression that might give you like better resources for describing one's actual conditions, or something like that.
It's beautiful.
I was going to ask you a question, Josh, or put this to you because I would love to know what your thought is. There's some really challenging philosophy that I think is happening in this book. I think of this, and I think, I was trying to suggest that I think this is one of the things that makes this book so exciting and interesting, is that you can read it both as literary criticism, which it most certainly is. You definitely come away from this book thinking, wow, I have entirely new ways of reading works of literature. but it also is very much, as I say, can be read as a book of theory, a book of philosophy. And, you know, if you think even about the title itself and the subtitle, Blackness and the End of Man, which alludes, I would say, doubly. I mean, it's most immediately an allusion to Sylvia Wynter, and, you know, her argument that one of the problems that we have is this, what she calls this kind of overrepresented category, right, of man as this bourgeois liberal subject that so much of the world has been conscripted into serving, right? And so you have a very small minority of the world that gets, you know, Amazon Prime junk every day, and then 95% of the world is, you know, is in various states of subjection in order to make that possible, right? And then, but we take as a model for the kind of ideal subject of rights that, you know, the state is supposed to most immediately protect, and so on and so forth, that very small minority, right? That subject. And so you're referring on one level back to Wynter, and Wynter herself, right, is, or I certainly think of her as challenging, revising, correcting, I think you might even say Foucault, right? Who has that very famous passage at the end of The Order of Things, right? With the, you know, where he's looking at the beach and there's this kind of Robinson Crusoe moment of, you know, the footsteps in the sand. And he says, you know, man, where he means something similar to what Wynter is talking about, this subject of the European Enlightenment that has existed, you know, for a couple of hundred years. He says, you know, this subject was created historically and may in fact pass from the scene, and perhaps is passing even as I look at these footsteps being washed away by the sand, right? This kind of Crusoe man who shows up everywhere and just claims dominion over things, right? Dominion over the animals, but also obviously dominion over Friday, right? Friday shows up and he says, well, call me master, right? So that Friday is like a pet. Friday is an animal. And one of the things that I think you're grappling with in this book is this sense that one of what's exciting about a lot of this literature are some of the ways in which, and I'm thinking in particular here of your readings of, you know, of Hurston, of course, From Their Eyes We're Watching God, but, you know, of this, a kind of way of that these writers, these Black writers, have been trying to think about a boundarylessness or some kind of continuity between the human and the animal, without that continuity being, you know, frightening, or it's not necessarily frightening, but you know, objectionable or needing to be suppressed in some ways. That there's a binding between the living and, you know, between the processes of life and death, and a continuity of all the things that are alive in the world that we can hold together and be bound to without necessarily requiring this kind of hardened boundary of man with a capital M, you know, Foucault's man and Sylvia Wynter's man, that she's trying to have us move beyond and replace. I just thought, you know, Simone, I'm glad you mentioned this, because, you know, this is a beautifully written book. You know, it's just something that is worth saying. But there's this lovely passage. This is the very end of the chapter Mule, of course, in which you take up, among other things, Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. And this is just the very end of that chapter. I just want to read this. Beautiful. You write, ultimately, Tea Cake will contract rabies from a dog he encounters in the coming flood, and Janie will be forced to shoot him in order to save her own life. that the novel ends on this note, that is, a major death caused by proximity to the animal is of critical import. From the opening of Their Eyes Were Watching God, Hurston makes it clear that there is no communion to be had with the animal without the possibility of death. There is no bond unmarred by blood. This, for Hurston, is the work of the figure of the mule as a problem for thought, signifying there on Nahum Chandler, also passing, shout out, how we might collaborate across unfathomable distance and think about difference, not as an occasion for domination, but as an opportunity to sketch a dying world anew. And this is something I guess I've been thinking a lot about, because I think, you know, so many of us, it's, I don't want to say it's fashionable, but there's a kind of sense in the air of thinking about the end of the world, thinking about the end of things, thinking about apocalyptic, a kind of apocalyptic moment that we find ourselves in, or that certainly feels apocalyptic. But I hear you also talking about a kind of beginning anew, right? And I've always, at least in my reading of Winter, I think of her as thinking about a beginning anew, a new humanism. And so I wonder how you think about that. You also end very curiously to me, there's a wonder there that you kind of, I think, highlight, you italicize it at the very end of the book, you isolate this notion of mentation. It's a very philosophical, kind of technical term. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you think about this book as philosophy, what you're trying to do here with the animal, the human, the other, man. It's a hard question, you know, but it's
no, it's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, we both, I don't know. I mean, at Princeton, I think part of what I learned in the English department was that there are very specific disciplinary distinctions, you know, that we had to be wary of between English and philosophy. But the philosophers pulled me in from the very beginning in terms of my time there. So reading Jacques Derrida's The Animal, That Therefore I Am.
Yeah.
Thinking about this opening scene with him and his cat, and thinking about Simone's cat, right, of course. But also about County Cullen's cat, right, with who, Christopher Cat, with whom he co-authored these two children's books, right? I talk about it a bit in the introduction. But part of why I bring that up was, I guess, as a graduate student, 23 years old, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, well, what's the relationship between Derrida's cat and County Cullen's cat? Like, what's happening there between the moment where Derrida's cat sees him naked and it brings him, of course, right, to the Garden of Eden, and he has this whole moment thinking about the animal sort of returning his gaze, whereas Cullen is thinking about Christopher as a collaborator, right, always in the footnotes, right? If you read these children's books, Christopher's voice is this strange kind of underground, and I was just taken with that. And I was taken with this idea that some of the philosophical foundational texts in animal studies maybe did not necessarily have space for the kind of Black distinctions I grew up with as it pertained to animals especially. So my father is from Alabama, and growing up he would talk about inside dogs and outside dogs, for instance, right? The dog, the figure of the dog in animal studies has very little to do with the inside dog and the outside dog. It also has very little to do with DMX and with dog fighting, which was another sort of major feature of my childhood. And this is animal cruelty. It's not great, but there were dogs on my block that their companions, right, their human companions would feed them gunpowder, right? The idea was to make them tough, to make them meaner. And to me, there was a very specific way that those men, right, they were largely men, thought about the violence that they had lived through and the violence they were willing to see visited upon their companion animals. And that, to me, merited thought. Like, I really had to sit with what it was that the dogs I saw on TV, the dogs I saw in these continental philosophy texts, and the dogs on the block seemed to be doing very different things. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I'm trying to make a real intervention into certain key Western philosophical texts and how they've, I think, helped us think about animals, but without the present and insight of the slave and the formerly enslaved and their descendants. Frankly, I think there are very specific ways that Black people have historically talked about their relationship to animals in slave narratives, in fiction, and in poetry, right? Knowing, you know why the cage bird sings. This is Jared Sexton's work, right? But that doesn't mean you know the song, doesn't mean you know the words, right? There's an opacity to the animal that I think Black writers really respect and are trying to grapple with. I don't know what a mule has going on in its mind, right?
You have Jesmyn Ward exploring it. It's exploring the inside and the outside dog. right? And salvage
Right. Right, Salvage the Bones, but part of the reason Salvage the Bones took me though is because it won the National Book Award. And I was thinking, what does it mean that this novel that Jesmyn Ward has brilliantly written about dogfighting is getting this kind of national recognition at the same time that I don't see the interdisciplinary conversation shifting, right? That's a novel about dogs bringing intense harm to each other, but it's also a book about violence and loss and the loss of mothers. And Hurricane Katrina is described as a mother. There's Ash, the Black teenage mother. There's the mother that's dead. And they're connected across strata in these really beautiful, complex ways that aren't clean. So I'm not thinking about it necessarily as a book of philosophy, but it's definitely informed by philosophy. Philosophy is an important part of not just my training, but how I make sense and move through the world. I've been reading Bernard Stiegler recently, who was like a former bank, I don't know what it means to be a former bank robber, but he was a bank robber before he studied with Derrida. And I've been thinking about that too. Like, is he a prison intellectual? What's the relationship between him and these other prison intellectuals? And lastly, I'll say, just thinking about Winter, in January 2019, I got the chance to go to her home and spend 2 days with her and talk to her about the project. And I had to change the intro significantly because she just got me thinking about origin stories. What are the origin stories we tell ourselves about Black literary studies and our relationship to the figure of the human? And I think our visions of the human have always been capacious. Difference is not always about domination, but I think it is about respect quite often. I'm not gonna go play with a bear. I don't know what a bear has going on. A bear can really hurt me, and I'm not gonna pretend anything different, certainly not in the name of dominion. So.
I'm curious to see, oh, sorry, are we done?
Oh, actually, we have time for one more question, and Robert Edwards wanted to ask. Sorry for the interruption, Simone.
That's okay.
So Robert wanted to know, in joining, whoa, I just, it moved, sorry about that. He's saying it was such a great talk, and then Joshua, in your reading of Natural Animal and Native Son, what connections might be drawn between Bigger's violence against the rat and his violence towards women more generally? Do you think that such connections can be drawn? Said differently, I guess I'm wondering what you see as the connection between your readings of nature animals in the tradition and the right, specifically with ecofeminists throughout thought more generally. Is the question clear?
Okay. Yeah, there's another element of that. I'm trying to read the whole question so I can get at it. Yeah, I mean, how do I take that up in the book? I mean, part of how I try to address it, and then Simone, I want to get to whatever you were gonna ask as well. I'm trying to think with both sort of people who are explicitly self-identified as Black feminists, like Hortense Spillers, for instance. So another way to read that Mule chapter, for example, is an extended close reading of Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, right? Where I'm trying to really think about body and flesh and what Nanny says about Black women being the mules of the world, and then the way mules actually appear in Zora Neale Hurston's work, right? That I think part of what she's also saying about that position of invisibilized labor that's taken for granted is that there's a kind of what Du Bois calls a second sight, right? That there's actually another form of second sight that's opened up for the Black women characters in that novel. And it has everything to do with proximity to the natural world, right? That part of Janie's, sexual awakening is also, if you look, it's about flies and bees and flowers opening, right? It's about another version of the veil. That part of what happens also when you're behind the veil is you have the different sense of atmosphere. You can see different things. And so to the part of the question about Bigger, absolutely, his violence against Betty, his violence against his little sister. I mean, I talk about this in the intro too, right? That he's sort of also trying to torture his little sister with the rat's corpse, right? And it's part of the way we're meant to read Bigger from the very beginning, and Wright is explicit about this. He's supposed to in some ways be the embodiment of various terrible images that he imagines the reader already has as it pertains to Black boys and men in particular. And so part of what I'm trying to navigate, I guess, in the juxtapositions I've seen between him and the rat is just, I think it misreads not just his fullness, but also the fullness of the women in his life. So I spent some time close reading, for example, what his mother says to him, right? The that scene in some ways as his mother just kind of dooming him to a future death. It's supposed to be his mother sees that he's headed down a tough road. And I actually think there's a much more intimate reading of that available, right? Which is actually that she just wants her son to sort of stop this destructive behavior. So it's, I don't know that it's so much me trying to recuperate bigger or flatten the violence he engages in the text, but rather to sort of fan out and see what are the socio-political conditions that create this character, and how do we read his fugitive flight in a fuller way. Last thing I'll say on this, I teach Sylvia Wynter's No Humans Involved every term for this reason. She talks about sort of the Black male jobless poor as the blood sacrifice for Black middle class identity. And so as an abolitionist academic, I'm always trying to think about what it means to keep in front of us characters that have done violence and that have done harm, and understand what it means to read them with that as part of their fullness. Because I think if we can't, then there's no abolitionist future we can really imagine. Yeah. Simone, what were you about to say? I just want to make sure.
I was going to direct a question to Tongo, because I was thinking this whole time about this one thing that I wrote down in the haze that I'm always in when I listen to him. I think you did say this, right? I'm lucky to be a metaphor for no one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it really activated my interest in, how this is striking you, as, insofar as, there is a sense in which all metaphorical statements, right, presume something. And I just want to hear you complete that sentence in a way, like, does that even make sense to you?
Yeah, what I was kind of thinking about, and this thought was also kept actually conveniently kept jumping in my mind as I was reading this book, was the concept that, not only are we part of a whole, with the groupie kind of like dime store interconnectivity of all things, but we're also part of future wholes, or as dialectical relationships, synthesize things, from the most, from our moments of, everything from dying terrified. I just think about all this, just this kind of like terrifying destruction that we suffer. We don't even get clean deaths or easy deaths. We get the most, we get these terrifying deaths in which we die paralyzed with fear. And all the way up to the other side of this equation of kind of this power that I end up feeling, or I synthesize my survival. We synthesize our survival from, and we synthesize our resistance. So when I'm thinking about, I'm lucky to be a metaphor for no one. What is kind of left out is the temporal condition of that. So I'm a metaphor for nothing now, but I'm part of. I'm heading towards, or I will be part of a future synthesis, or that I'll be I'm the past of a free people. And so I'm tired, man. Like I'm really fucking tired. I'm really and I'm really tired. I'm tired of all that we suffering, and I'm tired of having to reproduce myself with supernatural means. But at the same time, though, I am. I don't say I appreciate, because that would be corny, but I look at all of our origin with a curiosity, seeing it as part of, you know, a future whole, a future consciousness that will have synthesized itself from, you know, both all of the groovy futurism type, you know, potentials, or also actually kind of the ancient wisdoms made futuristic, and these nightmares. So it's in a way it's an interesting kind of like not like a pit stop of invincibility, in that I'm kind of just like I'm looking at myself as just really part of a process, and therefore not even really a super singular incarnation of anything. You know. The end.
Well, I'm so sorry, but we have time for one more question, Joshua. Kwang Kim was wondering, he says, I was interested in joining this panel because of the connections I see with Zakiya Iman Jackson's work on animality and post-humanism, Sylvia Wynter too, and how Black studies is challenging decolonial thought and literature in ways that I feel Jesse McCarthy was speaking on. The way human and anti-human concepts of anti-Blackness shape the basis of racial capitalism, at least my non-Black understanding of reading Black feminism and Afro-pessimism, and its carceral models of civil life through policing and incarceration. Do you have any specific thoughts on how this conversation engages with abolition and its pertinence to Black liberation, which we are seeing in political discourse right now?
I feel like what Tongo just said addresses those things.
Yeah.
Matter of practice and thinking. First of all,
yeah, for sure.
No doubt. No doubt.
Oh, well, I wanted to say one thing on that quickly. Yeah, I mean, I think, so Ruth Wilson Gilmore says that abolition is about presence, right? That it's actually about not just tearing down carceral institutions, carceral ways of knowing and doing and being together in the world, but imagining what would replace them. And I think also thinking about what ways of being together do we already have here that are liberatory. And so I think the dream of a world without cages or chains necessarily includes the animals, and includes the trees, and includes the water and the dark earth beneath our feet, frankly. So part of what I do think I'm trying to outline in the book too is a kind of abolitionist, capacious vision that our writers and thinkers have always had, that they've always carried with them. You know. I don't know if anybody else wants to touch on that though. I feel like I would love to hear what Tongo and Jesse got on that.
I'm very curious. I'm very interested in the possibility that actually we are in some ways ensnared by our continued dependence upon certain ways of literary critical thinking, and that I'm always curious in my own, you know, I didn't get I guess, you know, I don't know what happened with my literary critical training, but it went askew somehow. And I feel like what ultimately happened was that I became skeptical of the practice of literary criticism, and that it became crucial to me to think about what it meant to write poetry as art and not as a part necessarily of, I mean, Joshua, we've actually had this conversation before about the possibility of eruption and of working outside traditional coherence. And so, you know, and I don't believe that any conversation about literature or practice of art is ever separate from how it's possible to think about the world as another place. It does not involve our suffering in this way. And for me, it doesn't begin this way for everybody, but for me, it begins with the individual separation of words from the things that come along with them. You know, and that's what I learned from Wynter. And that's what I learned from art. It's what I learned from studying art. It's what I learned from listening to other poets who are really working, like Tongo, you know. And yeah, I guess I guess that, you know, I want to insist, like, because I happen to be here in this moment, on that as a real practice of politics for me and others.
Yeah. Can you say more just quickly about the separation of, I think you said words and the things that come along with them?
Well, I mean, this is the beautiful thing about your book, right? Is that you start with a fascination with a few words, right? And yes, they relate, they have images and concrete things that might be attached to them, but really they're just ether, right? You know, mule, cock, rat, shark, they actually aren't anything. And what makes them solid, what gives them presence, right, is their penumbras of like, and so in a way, I'm more interested, you talk about the natural world, but actually I'm interested in kind of like the spatial world equally. And air.
Yeah.
And what is vibrating in those spaces. And so the things that come with words are all the things that are surrounding those 3-letter words that you're working. Those things to me don't look just like rat, you know.
Yeah.
See, it looks like, in my mind, it looks like a whole swirling mess. And that's what you're unpacking in the book, and that's what makes it valuable, you know, teaching us how to do it, because it, you know, it's so overwhelming, and you have to begin somewhere.
Yeah, I would just second that really quickly, just to say that, like Simone, I agree that, you know, there really is no division here in between the work of art, the creation of the work of art, and the social, the political, the environmental, right? Being itself. And, you know, like someone was saying, just attending to, forcing certain kinds of attention upon words in a certain order, in a certain time and space, in a certain way, changes so much. And I'll give you an example. You know, we should say, because a lot of folks might not, I mean, the folks on this panel know, but a lot of folks watching may not know, that the title of your book is a line of poetry from Lucille Clifton, right? Yeah. Being property once myself. And what follows that, right, in her poem is, I have a feeling for it. Being property once myself, I have a feeling for it. And, you know, there's this thing where, you know, Orlando Patterson, in his book on freedom, I mean, a lot of people know his book on slavery and social death, but he also wrote this, you know, massive tome on freedom. And the first line of that book, I'm going to paraphrase it, I'm going to mangle it and get it wrong, but he, you know, he essentially says, you know, the first people to really have a robust conception and understanding of freedom is the slave, right? If we want to have a serious conversation, you know, in political theory or political philosophy about freedom, we shouldn't go talk to some plantation owners. We shouldn't go talk to John Locke, an investor, you know, in the Royal Africa Company. We should talk to slaves. Like, it makes a lot of sense that somebody who's in the position of enslavement is probably going to have a deeper understanding and have thought more deeply about freedom than the man who is busy, you know, trading stock options in the slave markets, right? So that's on this kind of, you know, political philosophy side. But, you know, you think about Lucille Clifton, you think about the work happening in this book, and it seems to me that, you know, we're in this moment where we know that all of us, the whole globe, is at a very sensitive, very dangerous kind of place where we really need to make some profound changes in our relationship to the environment, to our ecology. And, you know, animal life, plant life. I'm thinking about Lucille Clifton on trees, you know, I mean, our relationship to the natural world how are we going to actually, you know, a lot of people want to talk about policy changes, or what carbon tax, this and the other, but how is any of that kind of stuff going to happen if we can't change how we really feel, right? And I'm getting at the way in which Clifton's line is, being property once myself, I have a feeling for it. And that part of the work of poetry is to actually help us to become reacquainted with ourselves, right? And reacquainted with our being in the world and our feelings, and expanding out what's possible there. And, you know, what I would say is, you know, to the question about, you know, abolition and all of these things, is that, well, you know, none of that might be possible. None of that is very likely to be possible if we can't, to some extent, you know, change who we are as people. And the only sort of way we know, I think, that sort of does that is art, right? Art, we know, works. We know that art changes the way people think about things. We know that art has a kind of truth quality that, you know, reading an article in Vox does not. Doesn't matter what your politics are. Here, you know, it's just, that's not what, you go there for a certain kind of thing. You go to a work of art for a different kind of truth. And, you know, I think one of the things that your book is pointing us to and saying is, look, if we really want to do this work, if we're serious about the work of abolition, if we're serious about the work of ecology, if we're serious about saving each other and saving the planet, who should we turn to? And just as Orlando Patterson says, if you want to think about freedom, you're really going to need to go talk to the slaves. I think part of what your book is saying, if you want to think about these entangled relationships, well, we have a body of literature, right? We have thinkers and artists and poets who have been doing this all along. And so here they are. And here's a methodology, here's a way into that work that I'm making available to you.
It's beautiful.
I'll just say real quick that I think you know, I'm absolutely tired. I'm so tired. I'm so tired of the white ruling class dominion, and I'm so committed to the dismantling of that. What is exciting about really about Joshua's mind as it dialogues with everything throughout the book is that, you know, it's actually it's a consciousness for freedom fighters to emulate, to look for, you know, to look for analysis, to look for comrades everywhere in this reality, in all of these social orders. And I think that, you know, it's so when I was you know, when I was talking about, you know, how dialectics play out in our position in it, I actually feel we are in the antithesis position. That, you know, these people, that there were people of various of conditions that came before us, and their approaches to conditions that come before us. We are talking back to that from an interesting little point of autonomy or autonomous outlook. It's fine. I think all bets is off. We can reinvent any will we is necessary. Reinvent any will necessary. How you like that? but what's to me why this is such a why I feel such a tenderness for this task is that, you know, like I.E. Quay Armer's title, you know, the beautiful ones are not yet born. Right. And so, as you know, our consciousness and how we treat it and how we grow it and how we make it more healthy and actually make it more more sane is that, you know, is that can be, we have an opportunity to be that transition into a consciousness that there's nothing invented that can keep it repressed. So in a way, it's just like, man, you know, how Joshua was getting down on the page is a real, just like, to me, it's like, it's a future self kind of peeking out, and just seeing the potentials of, really the potentials of the potentials of the mind. So I think that, you know, and that's what always with our artists, what we stumble onto sometimes just in our quest to keep it psychedelic, you know, is that we actually stumble on to a kind of an invincibility, if just an invincibility of analysis that can play out in any freedom fight. And it, you know, in conclusion, you know, one of my favorite fun facts is that Sonia Sanchez and Amiri Baraka taught at San Francisco State University the year before they had that historic strike, right? It basically gave birth to Black studies, you know, in the United States. And I don't think that was a coincidence. You know? The end.
I feel like such a heathen for even interrupting this. You know, like Megan says in the comments, I could listen to you for hours, but man, this has been a beautiful event and a beautiful conversation. And Simone, you've gotten several compliments on your cat in the comments as well. I'd like you to know that. Joshua, you said that this was the big first of the book celebrations. When are the next ones coming up? Can you tell us real quickly where that?
Yeah, so the next one will be at the end of the month. I'll be in a conversation with Imani Perry, who's my dissertation advisor and just one of the greatest to ever do it. So you can follow me online, or you don't even have to follow me. You can just find me via Google. But I'm at Sir Josh Bennett on Twitter, and I'll be posting updates over the next 2 months before the baby gets here. And after that, I'm gonna be radio silent for a while. But yeah, more coming up, more soon.
Felicidades, Joshua, seriously, on the book and on the familia and everybody. Thank you so much, Jesse, Simone, Tongo. It was such an amazing dialogue, and the way you all mixed everything together, so profound, so very profound. Also, I wanted to thank the audience, the enraptured audience, as I could see by the comments. It was a wonderful way to spend some time together, and please, if you keep visiting, City Lights is a reading series here in the Zoom Mundo. On August 18th, we have Anarcho Blackness with Marquis Bey in conversation with Andrew Cutrone. And August 26th, we have the great Ishmael Reed in conversation with Tennessee Reed as well. So please come join us for that. And if you haven't already, purchase this amazing book. The link is in the comment there. Help keep City Lights alive as a cultural center. Help keep literature alive as a cultural center. To learn more about upcoming events, please visit us at our website at www.citylights.com. And I've been Josiah Luis Alderete, your host for tonight. I want to say again, gracias, Joshua, so much, y'all. Take care of each other.
Thank y'all.
Yes.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank y'all so much. Take care. And we got to do this again, maybe offline, but we got to reconnect.
Absolutely.
All right, much love, everybody.
Blessings.
Peace.
Buenas noches, y'all.